Welcome to the Ancestral Kitchen Podcast with Alison, a European town dweller in central Italy, and Andrea, living on a newly created family farm in Northwest Washington State, USA. Pull up a chair at the table and join us as we talk about eating, cooking, and living with ancient ancestral food wisdom in a modern world kitchen.
So excited to talk about this topic today. 5 of the most expensive foods you can buy that are the cheapest foods you can make at home.
Nice.
I'm so excited, Alison. I've been talking to you in my head for 2 weeks, so it's nice that you're finally here.
I heard you in my head. I don't know how that happened.
I'm really excited because I feel like there's just this notion out there somehow evolved that these ancestral foods or fermented foods or organic regional eating is only for the elite, or that it's very expensive. And I just want to try and break the image a little bit today and challenge that notion that nutritious food has to be out of reach for the average person. I think we can all achieve it both in terms of cost and our intellect, which is to say our ability to learn these skills. These are really simple skills, which is not to say somebody can't learn a complex skill, but I'll be honest, my brain can only hold so much information. I can only remember so much, and I just like things to be nice and simple. So I want to reassure everyone that these foods are really stinking simple.
Yeah, I agree. I think really the harder part of it is just to get them into your day. Once you've overcome that hurdle and you've got them into your processes, they're just you don't even need to think about them.
Yeah, they're just the things that be. So before we start, Alison, I want to ask you what you had for your last meal, in case you haven't had breakfast yet. So what's the last thing you ate?
No, I have had breakfast. I skipped dinner last night, so I thought, I've got to have my breakfast before I talk. And I had a smoothie with, I'm celebrating the Sicilian avocados that are in our local health food store. Because I really like avocado, but I don't want it to come from 5,000 miles away to my home. I won't do that. So they have Sicilian avocados. There's several companies in Sicily, several kind of adventures that are making avocado. And they are delicious, and they aren't bruised, and the flavour is just beautiful. So I had a smoothie this morning with, what did I throw in there? Avocado, loads of ground linseed, a raw egg yolk, and some kefir grains that were ground up, and some Scottish ferment suans, which is the liquid that comes off the top of fermented oats. It's kind of sour and lemony. I put that in there for the liquid. And then I had some cacao nibs left from making tea yesterday. Put them in there, whisked it all up. And so it was kind of smooth avocado with a hint of chocolate and a nice, lots of really good fats from the linseed and the egg and the avocado. And it feels like a treat. It was lovely.
Well, see, right here, your breakfast is the perfect example of what we're talking about. The avocado is undoubtedly the most expensive ingredient that you put in there. And that's, as you're saying, a luxury for you. It's not like you have those every single day. But everything else is scraps, things that even would have been thrown out, the kefir grains or the leftover cacao from making your tea. These are just scraps of things after you made a product.
You're totally right.
But if you were going to buy that, it would be a $30 smoothie.
Yeah. That's what really interests me about the Scottish suans, because it literally is a ferment of scraps. They make porridge oats, and then the people used to take what was left from the mill, rubbish, and ferment it because it was useful. And so it is, like you said, that scrap, the kefir grains most people either throw or give away, the cacao husks I've already used for tea and I'm using them again. And that would be really quite expensive outside, I'm sure.
Well, my meal was,
tell me.
I'm happy to say that I didn't have beans and pork for once. So. branched out a little bit. We're really into making these days what we're calling it quesadillas. I don't think it has anything to do with a real quesadilla. I don't really know where I got that name, but we get these really awesome organic tortillas, and I put in some raw cheddar, and then we cooked black-eyed peas in beef bone broth. So I put some of those in there. Then after we cook that, in a little bit of a pool of grass-fed butter, then I ate it with baba ganoush, which is I think Mid-East dish, but it's eggplants that you roasted in the oven and then skinned, and then tahini, which I just made from sesame seeds that I toasted on the stove and then just blended up in the Vitamix. Yeah. And raw garlic and fresh lemon juice, cumin, sea salt, and cayenne pepper. And then you blend all that together and it makes this warm, divine dip. Now, we picked a lot of eggplants in the summertime, and so I made a lot of this and froze it. I don't think it freezes the best, but it's a pretty decent way to store it. I think if I had thrown it back in the blender for just a second, it might have been a little bit better, but it separates a little bit in the freezer. And then I had a little bit of we make tapioca pudding that I joke is basically a health food, but we get tapioca is not that healthy, but we get the tapioca, and then we have raw milk and cream, some of the egg yolks from our chickens, and a little bit of maple syrup, a little bit of salt, a little bit of vanilla. It's so good. It's not really a recipe, I don't really think, but it's a really good pudding, and it's so filling.
That sounds like such a kind of comforting winter.
It's
really
a total.
Nice
we haven't made it in so long, and the kids asked for pudding, and I thought, well, I think I have everything for tapioca pudding, and it is. It's just a thick. It's like a dark yellow custard. It's so good because the yolks are so dark. And then I made yesterday. I made a batch of the ginger turmeric tea. So I just take a bunch of knobs of ginger, knobs of turmeric. And then either whack the peel off of some lemons or just pour some lemon juice, not from concentrate, into the blender with some water and blend it all on high in the Vitamix. And then strain that through a nut milk bag and add boiling water. And then I just make half-gallon jars of that, stick it in the fridge, and we heat it. Or you can drink it cold, but hot or cold, it's delicious. It's another dark yellow. Yeah, it's really good.
Nice. Oh, yeah, wow. So you're really fooded up. It sounds like you had a gorgeous dinner.
Yeah. Picked up that's the thing. I was actually thinking when I ate it, honestly, I actually think to serve all of that onto my plate, I think I did it in under 10 minutes because the baba ganoush was already made in jars in the fridge, and the tapioca was already made in like a little custard bowl in the fridge. And the cheese is already done. The tortillas are already done. The beans are already done. I just make a big pot of them every, 2 or 3 days and put it in the fridge. So then I can pull it out for anything. I just have cooked beans ready to go. And if we don't eat them in time, give them to the chickens. So
yeah. Nice.
But yeah, I think the whole thing took about 10 minutes to make. So.
And 10 minutes to eat.
Oh, and the tea was already, the tea was already made too. I just had to pour a little bit into a pot on the stove. So
yummy.
Yeah, it was good. Yeah, so it's food. All right. Well, speaking of food, let's talk about food.
Yeah. Why not?
Okay, so let's dive in. So I actually want to I'm going to start out with a little selection from a book that I'll recommend to readers. If you question the ancestral life on a budget, or if you just question, being able to eat outside of a grocery store or just partially outside of a grocery store, and you just think there's just no way, I challenge you to find a copy of the book Radical Homemakers by Shannon Hayes. I think I told you this, and I can't remember if I said it on the podcast, but I had the most serendipitous meeting of this author in the mountains of New York. Just stumbled up on this farmer's market where she happened to be and had no idea who she was, but bought all her books. And
Wow.
But I'm just going to read a quote where she talks about food. She says she was trying to figure out how to rationalize eating well when it was going to be probably too expensive. So she started doing research, and she said, truth be told, when I crunched the numbers, a farmer's market meal made of roasted, local pasture-raised chicken, baked potatoes, and steamed broccoli cost less than 4 meals at Burger King, even when 2 of the meals came off the kiddie menu. The Burger King meal had negligible nutritional value and was damaging to our health and planet. The farmer's market menu cost less, healed the earth, helped the local economy, was a source of bountiful nutrients for a family of 4, and would leave ample leftovers for both a chicken salad and a rich chicken stock, which could then be the base for a wonderful soup. But when push came to shove, I knew that Burger King would win out. The reason? Many people don't even know how to roast a chicken, let alone make a chicken salad from the leftovers or use the carcass to make a stock. Mainstream Americans have lost the simple domestic skills that would enable them to live an ecologically sensible life with a modest or low income. So with that as my thesis, I thought I would bring up these 5 foods, and you and I'll just share some of the easy ways we make them and point everybody listening to where they can learn more about making them and just take some of the, weirdness out of them.
Yeah.
Great. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's start with bone broth.
Okay, good
bone
place
broth
to start.
is an absolute staple. There's a long time when we couldn't even afford to buy meat of the quality we wanted, so we just bought the bones. And you get a lot of protein, there's glycine, lots of nutrients, it helps your body to make glutathione, there's collagen, everything good comes from bone broth. And it can be pretty expensive to buy at the store. So I looked around here and I found you can buy these frozen bags of bone broth, which is 1.5 pounds for $9. So when I think about how much bone broth we go through, that seems like it would be a pretty high price. Could you find it for sale where you live, Alison?
Yeah, it's not so easy. I remember it being quite easy in the UK because there's people set up to market bone broth. Here you can find it in the supermarket. Not necessarily kind of everything. So we do like chicken and beef and duck and lots of different bone broths here. But you can find some fresh broth, with the kind of butters and that on the shelf in the supermarket. And half a litre, you're looking at 3 or 4 euros for it, which compared to what we pay to make our bone broth is just, I couldn't even consider paying that amount of money for the amount of bone broth we use. I
know, forget about.
It wouldn't be usable.
Right, and you'd be afraid to put it in soup. You'd be afraid to cook anything with it. You wouldn't want to drink a cup of it in the morning. You'd be like rationing out a tablespoon to everyone.
Yeah, I can imagine kind of using it for a special occasion, but that's not how we use bone broth here. So it's not something that I would be able to eat every day or use in my kitchen every day at that price.
Right. Now, I said that there was times when we just bought the bones. We do buy meat now. And so we have leftover bones from things. But you can often buy, I don't know about where you are, Alison, in Italy, but I know here, pretty much most butchers, you can go and say that you want to buy a block of chicken bones. And after they take meat off of the bones, they basically have this waste product. Some people buy it for their dogs. But I've bought big boxes of them before from Azure Standard is a bulk, like small farm, I don't know what you want to call it, co-op thing that we can get out here. And I bought like a big case of just bones, and we cut them up with a bone saw, and it was a really, really, really cheap way to make a ton of bone broth. Now for you, that wouldn't work so well because you have a moderate freezer space, whereas we were able to drop an entire case into our chest freezer. You don't have that where you're at. Do you buy bones where you're at? Do you buy them from farms, or how do you get bones?
Yeah, so the way we work at the moment is the farmer that we buy virtually all of our meat from, I just ask him for bones and he gives them to us for free. So whenever I do an
I've
order
run
with
into
him,
that with a lot of farmers.
Yeah.
Or people who are butchering.
But I think it's because we buy a lot of stuff from him. Maybe, if I went and just asked for bones, they wouldn't be free. But we're buying all of our meat from him. So I get a bag of them for free, and we do that every time we place an order. And so then I can just throw them in the freezer if I don't want to make it straight away, or make the stock and then put the stock in the freezer. Regarding chicken, he doesn't sell the chicken bones separately because the chickens are always sold bone in. So what we do is we'll buy a chicken and then we'll cook the chicken and save the bones and make the stock with the bones. So the chicken doesn't happen quite so often as the beef, but I mean literally they're just, I'm not paying any extra for the bones, and I'm not paying anything for beef bones at all.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the same because we have friends who butcher. See, this is part of the importance of getting into your network of farmers is when you have a network of farmers, they know what you like. And my very generous friends keep giving me bags, of tallow and bones and, organs, and I'm not paying for them.
Yeah.
But they know that I use them, and they would rather they get used than get trashed. And even those of them that use it, if they're butchering a lot of animals, then there's no way they are going through it all on their own. And yeah, get into that network. But also, even just buying bones is cheaper than buying meat.
Completely.
Even if you're just straight up buying bones.
In England, we used to pay a couple of pounds for a massive bone of bag of beef bones from our farmer.
Now, I have found at Whole Foods, which is a chain store here in the United States, their bones I feel like they're still pretty expensive. So but still cheaper than the meat.
Yeah.
But they sell them not even in their meat cooler. It's over in a separate section with dog food. So you can't even find it. Yeah, it's not even in the regular section. So, we make our bone broth almost exclusively out of garbage.
Yeah.
So we have bones left over, as you say, from making things. And our friends who butcher, they butcher very well. And so if they give you a meat bone, there's more meat on it than, a T-bone steak. So we tend to cook those, and then we shred the meat and make it into some form of stew once we've then completed making the broth. But then when I cut onions or carrots, celery, those sort of things, any vegetable, the clean scraps just go into a container or a bag in the freezer. And after a while, you've accumulated enough to make broth, and I just pull that bag out and dump it into a kettle with the water and the bones. I do suggest, if you can, when you throw your bones in the pot and you add water enough to cover, that's how you know that you have the right amount of water. Then add a little bit of raw apple cider vinegar and let it sit for half an hour. That is alleged to help pull some of the minerals out of the bone. I can't tell you for sure because I don't know. But
that's one of the questions I was going to ask you, because I'd heard that.
Yeah.
And I thought I wrote a note. Ask about vinegar. Do you do the vinegar thing? Because we do too.
I do. I've seen back and forth, and I figure, you know what? It doesn't hurt to do it, so I just do it. Yeah, so I don't even know how much our bone broth costs because I just use scraps of, trash. You can use, that Nourished Kitchen has what she calls her ultimate guide to bone broth. If somebody wants to learn about bone broth, I recommend going there. People have asked me, as long as I've been making bone broth, they've asked me for the recipe, and I've always just had no idea what they're talking about. I was like, I don't know, you put bones in a pot and you put water in the pot and you boil it. But her ultimate guide to bone broth will help demystify it. So you can ask for beef knuckles, neck bones, shanks, oxtails, marrow bones. And then for chicken bone broth, you can use the whole chicken. You can use chicken feet. You can use just the bones of your chicken. You can use the backs, the wing tips. For turkey bone broth, the same. And then for pork, you can use ham hocks, pork neck bones, pork trotters. I think I told you in a different conversation we had that I got all the trotters from all the pigs that were being butchered in one day for free because nobody else wanted them except for me. And so that was a great way to get bones for free. And then for books, if anybody wants to read, I prefer sitting down and reading versus going online, although I do both. But Nourishing Broth by Sally Fallon Morell has a lot of information about bone broth. If you aren't really convinced you should drink bone broth, then just go ahead and read that book. You'll be sold on it. It's the best sports drink you'll ever run across. I swear. It's the best sports drink in the world. And then Nourishing Traditions, which is just her general larger cookbook, also has some information on bone broth. Do you have any favorite resources?
No, I don't really know where I learnt about bone broth. I mean, I probably Nourishing Traditions was the first place, but then I just tend to just do stuff, and then we like it or we don't you? So I do. I should
also say, I was just gonna say, if on my own blog, farmandhearth.com, I do have a bone broth recipe on there, just one, but I told on there how if you don't have a lot of freezer space, I cook my bone broth down. When we had really tiny freezer space, I would cook it down and basically make it into bouillon cubes. So I put that on the blog there.
Oh, great. Thanks. We'll link to that in the show notes. The bone broth that we do here, I always do in a slow cooker because my slow cooker's big enough to handle the capacity. And I've noticed, I've had 2 or 3 slow cookers in my time, and I've noticed there's a difference between the slowness of them. So the first one I had went quite fast, and even on the lowest, the stock was bubbling quite, viciously. Whereas the one I've got at the moment, low really actually is low. And I remember reading about broth years ago that, you're just supposed to just see the odd bubble coming over the surface every now and again.
Not the rough,
And my slow cooker now does that. So I leave my beef in there for 24 hours, sometimes a little bit more. Really a long time. I don't leave the chicken in quite as long. But then we kind of do what you do in that we often have marrow bones and we eat the marrow if it's still visible.
Yes.
Otherwise the beauty's gone into the stock. And then there's sometimes scraps of meat and stuff, and my husband loves to eat those off there. So very often we get a meal out of the scraps as well as the broth, which is lovely, obviously, to cook anything in, any grains, any soup. Yeah. But also, like you said, to drink, it's really nice. My son likes it with a little bit of miso stirred in, just to give it a little salt.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And it's really tasty.
Yeah. Oh, I love putting some turmeric in my broth. I forgot about that. In chicken broth, it's really good. Well, you know that I actually haven't been able to run a slow cooker since we moved out here, since they take so much power and we're off grid now. But we just put the kettle on top of the wood stove, and so it kind of just cooks as long as the stove is going, which when it's cold we keep it going pretty much around the clock. So
so there's nothing extra being used. That's just ideal.
And ideally for me, I would do the majority of our bone broth. I would prefer to make and freeze bone broth over the course of winter. Because when summer comes, I don't want to be running the stove. So, all right. So next up, let's jump onto sourdough bread. Now, I don't want to go super in depth on sourdough. This is something we'll have to have its own episode. But I do want to demystify it just a little bit. So I actually put sourdough bread and soaked/sprouted quick breads because those breads are also pretty expensive, but it's so easy to make at home. So when I was looking at buying sourdough bread, you can buy cheap sliced loaves like sandwich bread, or the bigger rustic bowls. So you're running between $3 to $6 a loaf, some even more for the more artisanal ones with garlic or raisins or whatever. And so for but for making sourdough bread at home, the essential ingredients for the most core sourdough recipes would be your flour, which could be wheat flour or einkorn or rye, or I do combinations, and I know you have done combinations also. You need salt, you need water, and you need some of your starter dough, which is basically just, sour flour. So those are pretty cheap ingredients. Now, you can do lots of different varieties of sourdough breads, enriched ones with, milk and egg yolks and things like that. All sorts of different flours. And then I know you make the most remarkable lectin-free breads and soaked bread, quick breads, which is take your grains that you're, just imagine you're going to make your gingerbread or cornbread or blueberry muffins or whatever you're going to cook. And instead of starting and baking it today, you started last night and you just took the flour portion and you let it soak in the liquids, buttermilk or something overnight, and then cooked with it the next day. So really, really, really simple. And a homemade loaf of sourdough bread, by my calculations, cost about $1 or even less.
Wow, that's a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of
it's a big difference when you're
eating it every day. When you're eating it every day.
Yeah, or when you have a big family, or when you're feeding a lot of people. This is the first month since we've lived here that it's just been our family here. So this is the first month realistically of just only feeding us, and our family's not even that big. By the standards of, I'm the second of 8, I have 7 siblings and I only have 3 kids. So there's 5 of us here, but even that is a decent sized family to feed. And, when you start scaling some of these things up, it can get really expensive.
I remember when we lived in Cornwall in the UK, that was where I first got into baking sourdough. And I was just happily kind of making our bread, and we had never bought any. And then we used to do our shopping at a farmer's market there. And then one week, a bread stall arrived at the farmer's market, and the breads looked so beautiful. But I just remember thinking, I wonder what they've got and how much they are, and going over and just kind of being knocked when I saw that the breads cost like £5 for a bread there.
Wow.
That was similar to what I was making, €5 or €6. And that kind of, I saw in other bakeries, that's the kind of standard price. And it's the same here, if you go to the shops where we would shop, so the flour is, flour that someone's taken care to choose, and perhaps
I didn't even
local.
I didn't even price that loaf.
They're looking at €5 to €6 to €7 for one loaf of bread. And the flour that we choose here is not the cheapest at all. We generally cook with spelt or rye, and I try to get Tuscan flour, and it's not, I choose for what I believe in rather than the cheapest. And even then, I worked out that a loaf of bread that I make costs less than €2. So it's a third to a quarter of the price. And if you went out and bought wheat instead of spelt, you're looking at half of that, because even the ancient grain wheats are cheaper than spelt.
Yep.
And so really, if you don't have a problem with wheat, you could make a bread for literally like just over €1 probably, that is going to cost you €5 or €6 outside.
Oh yeah. And we honestly break it down even less, because we buy the large bags and put them in the freezer or store them. We have a garage area that's really cold. Even in the summertime, it still stays cool. So we can put flours in buckets down on the ground, on the concrete, down and back underneath the canning shelves, and they stay really cold. So they don't spoil or anything like that. And so buying in 50-pound bags brings the price down even more, which not everybody's going to do. But even by using, and we get probably the most expensive versions of the flours, as you're saying, ground on special mills that don't overheat the flour, and grown on small farms and organic and all of that. Even then, it's still $1 or less for a loaf. And those breads that I priced $3 to $6 a loaf, you're not even looking at that decent of flour. That's not even the kind of bread that this doesn't even compare.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you went to the smaller artisanal shops, out in the small towns where there's little bakeries and things like that, you'd probably be paying about $10 a loaf out there.
Wow.
Books that people can look at, there's a lot online if you want to look up sourdough bread. There's just so much, and some of my favorite places to look, as always, are the Traditional Cooking School, Nourished Kitchen, and I think the Healthy Home Economist. I can't remember if she has anything about sourdough, but she has lots of good stuff. So a book that I really like, that one of my really good farm friends that I hope to be interviewing on this podcast one day recommended to me years and years ago, is Peter Reinhardt's Artisan Breads Every Day. And he covers, it's not just a sourdough book. Everything in here is not ancestral. It's a really profound education on bread, and you can learn to make some, traditional lean French breads and things like that. But his sourdough pizza is so easy. Sourdough pizza crust. When I get to the state, you do step 1, step 2, whatever. And when I get to the step where you're about to roll it out onto your pizza pan, I throw it into a bag and shove it in the freezer. And then when I want pizza crust, I can just pull it out, and in a day, we've got pizza crust. I haven't done lots of breads of late just because we've been doing gaps for so long, but I'm not really doing gaps right now, so I might make some breads again. Nourishing Traditions also has information on sourdough and soaking for quick breads, and Wild Fermentation by Sander Alex Katz, and also his other book, The Art of Fermentation. But Wild Fermentation has some recipes in it for sourdough, so if you want, and the Artisan Breads Every Day has also a recipe for making a starter from scratch, which is how I made my first one. So
nice.
You can, so there's lots in those.
There's I remember learning from a Peter Reinhardt book myself. He's got a whole grain book, which
he does.
I got from the library when we were in the UK and learnt a lot from. I like for rye, I like the Rye Baker website. I think the guy's name is Stanley, possibly Ginsberg. But he's got a really great site that's dedicated just to rye baking, which is good. I've got a lot of recipes on my site, not a book's worth, but all the recipes that I love, including my pizza recipe, lots of spelt recipes.
Oh, good. And your lectin-free?
The lectin-free is not up there yet, but hopefully it will be soon.
Oh, okay.
And the other resource that I used a lot when I was learning sourdough was there's a forum online called The Fresh Loaf, which is basically a bunch of forums with thousands of people on there. And you can go on, if you've got a problem, you can post pictures of what's happened to your loaf, you can ask questions, you can search the archives.
Oh, I love
and
that.
Every single topic you can imagine's on there, literally. There's years and years and years of research. And when I first started, I met a mentor on there, the guy who was been baking for a long time, who just kind of helped hold my hand through my own process of trying to make bread with English flour that was 100% whole grain. And so there's a real community around that site, which if you've got questions or if you want to learn, it's a great place to go.
Right. Awesome. And for anybody who's afraid of making sourdough, thinking, well, I can't keep up with feeding the sourdough start all the time. When I can't remember what was going on, I always give starts to my friends, which is fantastic because then if I kill a start, I can call my friends and find out who has a start. I can get back from them. But one of my friends, when I took a start out that I hadn't used in a while and it wasn't acidic enough, it molded. And I called one of my friends and she said, oh, I still have the one you gave me, over a year and a half ago in the fridge. I never opened it. Do you think it's still good? And I said, well, let's find out. And sure enough, it fired right up and we were able to make plenty of bread from it. So if you're just not going to be able to use your sourdough start for a while, put it in a container, put the lid on it, shove it in the very back of your fridge. It's going to get like black liquid on top. Don't throw that out. That's the good stuff. And then you can just look online. How do I restart my sourdough start?
Yeah.
All right. Let's hop on to some beverages, kombucha and water kefir. I'm putting them in the same category. They're a pretty similar process. They both operate with a SCOBY, and they're both a delicious, bubbly probiotic drink. So for kombucha, I've done many workshops teaching how to make kombucha and the benefits of kombucha. And if you go to my blog, then you can find, just search the word kombucha, and I have my class packet there, what I used to use to teach classes, and you can see all the recipes on there. So I'm not going to give my recipe on here because it would just, there's no point. You can easily find it online in 30 seconds. But I was looking at buying kombucha in the store, and I do buy kombucha in the store. Say you're traveling or you're out and about and you just want something to drink, you want something fun. It's a fun option, you know, for a nice fun drink that isn't going to kill your gut. So on average, the prices are looking to be about $3 for a 16-ounce bottle. Do you have kombucha or water kefir available? And the water kefir is the same price. So do you have water kefir or kombucha available to buy in Italy?
Yeah,
Alison?
we do.
Or in the UK?
We do. I looked at the price and I was kind of astounded again. So 250 millilitres, a quarter of a litre, was €1.80, which means that it comes up at €7.20 a litre, €7.20 a litre, which we drink a litre of it a day, literally. My son loves it. It's a great, water kefir kombucha are great drinks for kids, you know, to kind of give them a feeling of soda or a feeling of lemonade or something. Yeah. So we drink a litre of water kefir a day. So we'd be paying if we were buying it, we'd be paying €7.20 a day just for our water kefir habit, which kind of knocked me back a bit, really.
Well, and the value, this is not, you know, when we're talking about, you know, when you went to the farmer's market and you saw the bread and things like that, we're not saying that they are overcharging. The value is not there. The value is there. You can invest that value and reap the return on that value by doing the processes yourself. You might say out of all 5 of these things we're telling you, there's one you never want to touch, and you're willing to pay someone to do the work. That's fine. That's totally fine. And that's what those people are there for. But if you say, you know, these are all things I want to have and I just can't pay those grocery store prices, well, you really don't have to. And let me scroll back up to make sure, but all of these are things you can turn on and off as the spirit leads. So, you know, I've taken my kombucha SCOBY and left it in a container in the garage for 2 years and never touched it. Brought it out, started making kombucha again the next day. You know, you don't have to be doing these things every single day relentlessly without stop. I feel like I definitely go in phases on them all. You know, we'll make a ton of it for a while, then we'll kind of ride on something else and make a ton of it again. And so if you go to my blog and you grab that recipe, I use 2 kinds of tea when I make my kombucha. I use an organic green tea and an organic black tea, very specific ones. It really matters which teas you use. But if you make the tea the way it's prescribed on my recipe, which is fully organic, remember it's $3 for a 16-ounce bottle at the store, and at home you're making 5 gallons for just under $5.
Yeah,
so
very different.
It's $1 a gallon, which is significantly different. Now, the process is so unbelievably easy. I'll say the process really short for kombucha, and then Alison, can you say the process really short for water kefir?
Sure.
I love them. I love them both, and I think that they should both be highlighted. For kombucha, essentially, the long and short of it is you'll boil water. And Alison, I'm sure every British person is tracking with me right now. You'll boil water, then you'll throw in tea. You know, per the recipe measurements or per your own inspiration. and then you'll let it steep per the recipe. You'll strain it out, and then you'll stir in sugar or a different carbohydrate source, whatever one you like. I use the sugar, organic cane sugar. Or you can do honey. I like doing honey too, but sugar actually brings the cost down quite a bit.
Yeah.
And then you'll let it sit and cool. And this is where you could make one part in the evening and then the next day, finish. This doesn't all have to be done in one day. So let it cool, and then you'll pour it into glass containers and add some starter tea, so some already fermented kombucha that you have from your last batch. And then typically you can also add in a SCOBY. You don't necessarily have to, but add in a SCOBY, and then a cloth top so that it can breathe oxygen. And then it will sit until it's as fermented as you like it. I like it to fully consume all the caffeine from the tea and all of the sugar, so that I'm not getting a sugar hit when I drink it. And then if you want to, you can bottle it, and you can use empty beer bottles or old, I just usually put it into mason jars. You can use any bottle really that you like, that you have.
So does your kombucha taste less sweet than the store-bought kombucha?
Yeah, I would say it definitely tastes.
Because I remember having kombucha before from stores a long time ago, years ago, and it just being far too sweet for me.
I think a lot of stores, not the stores. There are a number of brands that add sugar post-fermentation.
Oh, I see.
So there would be more sugar in it. And then there's usually a pretty considerable amount of fruit juice or some other source in it. I don't like mine to taste like vinegar. I'm not a fan of that. So I don't let it ferment until it gets to that point. I like to take it off right when it has this real light, airy, fruity, almost grassy sort of effervescent quality to it, which that effect is the tea you choose is really important in getting that.
Okay.
Different teas will imbue a different flavor. So tell us about your water kefir.
So the water kefir is maybe just a bit simpler than kombucha, a little bit, in that you literally just put water, and I use sugar, and you dissolve the sugar in the water, and then you add the kefir grains to that. Then I lightly close the lid, and I leave that for maybe 1 to 2 days. It starts to ferment, and you see the bubbles coming up, the grains increase in size, and then I strain that through a sieve into a swing top bottle. The reason I want to put it in a swing top bottle for this second phase, the second ferment, is because I like to capture the bubbles and keep them in there. And with the swing top lid, I do that. So once I've strained it through the sieve, I then add things to this bottle. So I will usually add some form of fruit, which gives it a bit of extra sugar at that stage, which will create more fermentation and therefore create more bubbles for you to capture.
Yes.
And I often add ginger. Ginger gives it a zing, but ginger also has lots of organisms on the outside of it that help it with the fizz. And then, sometimes I add different types of, I put fennel seeds, different types of spices, cardamom seeds. I put different fruit in. Sometimes we do, if there's some local mango, Sicilian mango, we'll put that in. Orange. Yum. Very often I start with something that's not water. So I'll start with maybe a tea. I made some with cacao husk tea. I remember putting a picture on Instagram a while back of that. And usually to allow my grains to increase, which is what I like, I do 2/3 a kind of a golden cane sugar, and then 1/3 a completely whole integrale, we call it in Italian. I like a whole sugar, which is just dark with nothing removed.
Yes.
And that mixture tends to make my kefir grains grow. And then the second ferment gives that liquid effervescence, and sometimes, serious effervescence. You have to be careful when you uncap the lid because your fringe goes up in the air. But my son loves that, and it's got the flavour of the fruit in it and the ginger and the spices or whatever I've put in there, and then it's got that fizz, which just makes it really, really tasty and fun. Like you said, it's a fun drink. I tend to ferment mine quite a long time because we're just not used to the taste of the sugar. We're used to having more sour flavours. So I've had situations where other people have tried mine and it doesn't taste like the shop kefir because it's not sugary. So that's just the way we do it here, because we prefer to have more of the fermentation and less of the actual sugar left. But with all the flavours and with the sparkle, it's such a fun drink.
Well, that's one of the most fantastic things about learning these processes at home. The first time I had a bottle of kombucha, I thought it was disgusting. And now I take that same bottle I had, which was a store, or as you say, a shop kombucha. And to me, it's just like, ooh, this is dessert. This is what we have. We had a girls' night, and so we said, well, let's get wild and get some shop kombucha. So that was our wild drink. It was some like really fruity kombucha from the store. But if you are making it at home and you just can't stand that sourness, start with it pretty sweet, and you will find that over time your taste really, really will evolve. I promise you, it really will. And if it doesn't, and you always stay in that kind of sweet place, well, okay, so that's fine. Who cares? You're making kombucha.
Yeah, you get to choose.
Yeah, it's all up to you. For books about kombucha, I really keep coming back to the same one. So if you have to pick one, Wild Fermentation by Sandra Alex Katz. He covers a lot of live culture foods in that. And then if you want to just learn more about the art of fermentation and history and things like that, then yes, The Art of Fermentation by the same author. And another really fun book, if you just want to get fun and crazy with flavors and adventuresome sort of mocktails and things, Kombucha Revolution by Stephen Lee is a really fun, just super gorgeous, really eye-appealing, juicy book. Really bright colors and lots of beautiful pictures of, tall Grolsch top bottles with, kombucha and lavender and stuff like that. So that's a really fun one. And of course, you can find lots of information online. The Cultures for Health blog has tons and tons of information about fermented foods. And if you go to my blog and you're looking for the kombucha, also look up fruit scrap vinegar. Vinegar is a similar process. It also grows with the SCOBY and is also just really, really, really easy to make, really fun. And it's another trash food because I use scraps of fruit to make the vinegar. It's just literally garbage, and there you get your really expensive, super high dollar, raw, organic vinegars. Okay, so that will close the book on kombucha. Any one of these we could do, a 10-day series on, but let's jump into kefir/yogurt. So I want to cover them both. They both kind of fall in the same category. They're just kind of regional versions of the same thing. So when I looked up buying them at the store, you are looking for an organic. I could not even find a raw milk version, but if you're looking for organic at the very least, and not even necessarily grass-fed. I was not always able to find ones that confirmed the cows are grass-fed, but they're ranging for a quart of 32 ounces. It's $5 to $7, sometimes higher. And I was looking for unflavored ones. Were you able to find kefir or yogurt for sale where you live?
Yeah, I concentrated on kefir. I pronounce it kefir. I don't know if that's right, but I can't change now after 15 years of saying kefir. And I found a goat's milk, because we use goat's milk, so I wanted to try and compare. So I found a goat's milk kefir that was €2.90 for 200 millilitres. And again, I kind of thought, right, okay, well, when we do a batch, we do 2 litres of milk. That's how much we get from the farm. And so that's... Right. 10 times what that 200 milliliter one is. So you're looking at €29 for the amount of milk kefir, which we get that milk for less than €2. Oh, yeah. So that was the most staggering difference that I could find. That there's such a huge difference between buying that one pre-packaged in a shop and making that here.
And we get organic, grass-fed, raw, whole milk. Yeah. And it's $10 a gallon. And so that puts us at $2.50 a quart for kefir yogurt versus the $5 to $7. So we're looking at least half, if not a quarter of the price of the store-bought one. And the process is so easy. So repronunciation, both ways are correct. The way, when I learned about kefir, I was 17 years old, I think I was 17. And my sister and I went on an amazing trip all summer to Russia and visited all kinds of different places and stayed with different friends all over. And one of the places we went was we took a 24-hour train ride out to the Caucasus Mountains, and that is where kefir is from. I had never heard of it, but everybody there introduced us to kefir. And I was like, what is this disgusting, weird yogurt in a can? Like, what are you trying to feed me? This is like rotten milk. That's what we called it. We're like, this is rotten milk. Oh, man. Send me back, please. Go back and repent. And we try everything. You know, I always try everything at least once, you know. But when I came back to the States, I thought about it later. And a couple years passed, and then I wanted to find it and make it, and I couldn't find it to buy, so I thought I'll just make it. And then I read online that you could buy starts for it, so I called the store and I said, do you have kefir starts? And the lady spent the whole she could not figure out what I was talking about, and then finally she said, oh, do you mean kefir? And I said, I don't know, is that the same thing? So I learned kefir is an Americanized pronunciation. But they're both totally usable and no problem with saying either one either way. So yogurt and kefir both are so stupid easy to make at home. It's not even allowable. Kefir, I make mine the positively laziest way. And I learned this from an amazing lady who I used to get my raw milk from, who had been making her kefir this way for 15 years. So she just pours some of her finished kefir into a jar, and then she pours in her milk, and she kind of stirs it all up, puts the lid on, and lets it sit overnight. And then the next morning she pours a little bit of it out into a jar, and then takes the rest of it and drinks it, for her morning kefir. So I never even get the grains. I'm always transferring it over too quickly. And so I don't even grow the grains, and haven't had a problem with it. I have seen one of my friends who was an old Russian lady. She used a tea bag, and she put her kefir grains in the tea bag and dropped that into her milk, so she didn't have to strain them out each time. And then you can also so kefir grains are tiny scobies, which we referred to during kombucha, but that means a symbiotic colony or symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast. It's just an acronym, SCOBY. And there's all different kinds of scobies, but the kefir scobies and the water kefir ones that you also referred to, they just look like little chunky grains.
And they're different, the two. You can't use the milk kefir grains in the water kefir, vice versa.
No, yes. They each consume different things, where the milk kefir feeds off of lactose. And that's actually where we get the term lactase for that enzyme, because they thought that was what they all did in lactofermentation. They thought all that fermenting process was lactase. But
I think that's quite an important thing to bring out.
Yes.
The process of making milk kefir actually does decrease the lactose content, and in some studies completely wipe out the lactose content. So if you have any problems with digesting milk, but you want to bring dairy back into your diet, it's a great place to start.
Yeah, that is the place to begin, is with kefir. Really is the best. And we should have mentioned that with the sourdough too, that fermenting the
Yeah.
sourdough consumes about 90% of the gluten in the sourdough. So, um, to make kefir, how do you make your kefir?
We use the grains. So
Okay,
we
yeah,
bought
yeah.
some grains years ago, and we
Jeez.
literally I usually sterilise the jar before I start. And then we've got the milk that my husband's just gone and got from the farm. We literally pour it into the jar, plop the grains in there, give it a stir, just put the lid on very loosely. And then if it's summer,
Right.
we just leave it out. If it's
Yes.
winter and it's quite cold, I've got a DIY proofing box that my partner made for me, which there are pictures of on my website and an article about if you're adventurous and want to make your own proofing box. And so we set that for a warm temperature in the winter because our house actually isn't that warm. And I will put that
Right.
in my proofing box if it's on. It's always on for other kind of ferments because I've kind of got bubbles all over my kitchen. And that then makes the process quicker because there's actually a difference in flavour I found
Yes.
between leaving
I
it out when
agree.
it's cooler and then the milk
Yes.
actually sours. You know, there's a balance between the milk souring and the milk kefiring. And, you know, both of
Right.
them taste nice, but they're different. So it's nice to be able
Yeah, I
to have it how you
definitely.
want it.
Yes, the faster that it ferments, the sweeter it is. I definitely would agree with that. My favorite way to do it is in the um, dehydrator because
Yeah, okay,
it's
that's a
like a
similar
proofing
thing
box.
then. Yeah.
Yeah, but it takes power, so I haven't done that since we moved here. Um, and it's actually funny. Our house is warmer during the winter because we keep the wood stove going,
Oh,
and
yeah.
then in the summer, our house actually stays pretty cool. So we have the opposite problem. Um, and when I lived in Virginia, yes, overnight I would have the perfectly thick kefir, but here it can sit on the counter for even 3 days, and then it just starts to clabber and separate before it even ferments. It can be so cool. So I either set up the dehydrator, which, like I said, I don't want to do here because of the power, or this is a really funny way that I learned to make yogurt when I lived in Virginia. My friend takes a boot dryer. I don't know if you have one of those, but we have
No.
boot dryers, and it's just like two pegs with vents on top that you put your boots upside down on, and it dries your boots out. And Gary's had one that he bought when he was 18, when he was an iron worker, and we still use it today. And you put the boot dryer down on the floor, put your jars next to it, and then put a big box on top.
So it
And
blows
it's
out
the
warm air, does it?
perfect temperature. Yeah. Yes, but a really,
Gosh,
really low flow. You can't even feel it with your hand. It's such a low, low flow.
I've
But
never
it
heard of that
creates
ever.
perfect.
Using a
Well,
boot
it's funny
dryer to
because
make kefir.
a lot of people who either work in construction, like he was working in the ironworker trade, or if you live out in the country, then a lot of people have boot dryers, and they're just they're just a real cheap little thing, and so that's a great way to do it.
It's fun.
The I know it's so weird, but it just works. Um, Also, it's worth saying that if you like cultured butter, when you make your kefir, don't separate the cream off the milk. Leave the cream on
Yeah.
top and let the kefir ferment, and then just there'll just be a slab of cream on top. You can pick it off and just run it through your blender and make it into butter really easily. So that's a
There's so many
great.
lovely things you can do. I remember experimenting last
Yeah.
year with a recipe from Dara Goldstein Russian book where I kind of cooked the milk first really, really gently to reduce it. So it went kind of a bit more creamy and a bit more
Yeah.
sweet. And then I
Yeah.
fermented it with the grains. And it
Yeah.
was like a beautiful custard, kind of naturally sweet dessert, which was really wonderful.
Oh, one
What I
of my
wanted to
friends actually. Oh no, go ahead.
I wanted to say before I forget that it's done and I've strained those grains out, they can keep in the fridge in water. I just put them in water in the fridge and they can keep there for weeks without having any milk in them. So you can have a break, like you said, or you can freeze them. When I've moved
Right.
countries, what I've done is I've taken my kefir grains and I've frozen them in water in a very small container, very small Tupperware. And then literally the morning that I'm about to move countries, I've taken the kefir grains out of the freezer and then carried them with me, and they've lasted through many moves, or for a holiday or something they could last by just putting them in the freezer.
Right. That's fabulous. When we moved from Virginia, we drove. I want to say it took us a week or so because we stopped and saw some things along the way. Drove from Virginia to Washington State, and I had this huge special cooler with all my ferments in it.
Yeah.
All these jars and bottles kind of bubbling and clanking around. And a big, huge jar full of scobies. And some people definitely thought, why don't you just throw that stuff away? That's disgusting.
Just can't.
And no, I was like, these are my friends. Like, these are babies. I grew these, I grew these vegetables, and then I fermented them, and they are moving with me. And I still have just one of those jars left. I'm kind of milking it along, for special occasions. I can take a little bit out. One of those jars of sauerkraut.
You reminded
like
me that earlier this year we had a kind of a disaster here housing-wise, and we moved 9 times in 2 months. And each time we moved, we were on the train because we don't drive, we don't have a car. We had this sort of cool bag thing with clinking kefir bottles and jars of sauerkraut. And my husband's kind of like this pack horse carrying this thing along, and it's clinking. But we couldn't not do it. We just couldn't.
No, absolutely not. The thing is, once you start fermenting, these things gain such value too, and you can't just hop out and buy them anymore. The quality is so different than the store-bought. And so for making kefir, if you don't have any grains, you could find a really good high quality store-bought kefir, and start with that. Or you can ask online in forums or groups or on your social media. Does anybody have kefir grains willing to share with me, or water kefirs, sourdough starters, whatever? You can also order them from Cultures for Health. And that's another way, actually, you can save your own kefir grains. You could dehydrate them. But you can order them from culturesforhealth.com. They're not sponsoring us or anything, but I really love the company. I've been ordering from them for 10 years and have had great success with everything I've gotten from them. For books, of course, Wild Fermentation is right at the top of the stack. He really is the king of ferments. The Art of Fermentation, if you want to learn all about the history and the origin of ferments. Nourishing Traditions, of course, covers lots of dairy fermentation and, key nutritional reasons why. The Home Creamery is a book I have that is just a really simple, small paperback book with lots of recipes for your, cow. And then if you really get into doing kefirs and things like that, yogurt, there's all kinds of different cultures you can get. So different regional bacteria, just like that, Finland or Norway, that different places are known for, and you can make kind of unique yogurts like that. So yogurt processes vary based on the culture that you get, but they're all still very simple. They're just step-by-step things.
I also wanted to say that if I remember, if someone's kind of not sure about a dairy allergy, that the kefir grains can be used in other milks. So we've made kefir grains with coconut milk. We've made kefir grains with oat milk. We've made kefir grains with hazelnut milk. It's important to feed them in normal milk, in cow milk or sheep milk or goat milk every now and again, because they won't grow in those other milks. That's my understanding. But they do a good job in fermenting other milks, so you don't have to restrict yourself just to animal milk.
No, that's a great point, and thank you for adding that in. So, last but not least, the king of all ferments.
I think everyone knows what it's going to be.
Oh, the one and only sauerkraut.
Yay.
All right, so finding live, active, fermented sauerkraut, you have to be careful and watch what you're buying because there are jars of canned, shelf-stable, so-called kraut. They're usually made with vinegar. They're not probiotic. They're not alive. They're dead foods. What you want is, the sauerkraut that has to be refrigerated, and it would say, use by or keep refrigerated, things like that. When I was looking at them online, it seems like they wildly vary in price.
Okay.
But I saw ranges, $7 to $9 for 16 ounce, so a pint.
You and your ounces. It's really confusing
Sorry.
for us Europeans.
Sorry. We're the rebel colonials, and we're clinging to our guns and our ounces and our coffee. Okay, don't tell the queen. But I do have to look online all the time when I find recipes, and I'm like, wait, how many milliliters is this?
Me too.
But you want the jarred, refrigerated, active, live, fermented kraut. So $7 to $9 ish for 16 ounces. What were you finding over there in Italy?
Yeah, so I found grams, 330 grams, so a third of a kilo, was just over €2. And I compared that then to what I do, which is we tend to make 2 kilograms roughly at a time, so 5 to 6 times what you could buy in that jar. And we buy one massive cabbage for that, which when we buy the most top quality cabbage that there is, a local one that's organic from the health food store, supporting a local business, we pay perhaps €4 for it. Whereas if I buy it in the jars, I'm going to be paying €12. Obviously, you can buy cabbages for much cheaper than that, but still, it's substantially cheaper to make it.
That is a thing that boggles my mind, and we have definitely run into that with every single one of these foods so far, is that even when you buy the premium top of the line ingredient, you still come out spending half of what you would, if not less. And that's just saying, and even if you say, hey, I'm going to meet halfway, I'm not going to get the primo, but I'll get at least organic. Even then you're spending, a quarter or a tenth of the cost. All right. Making sauerkraut. There are so many ways to make sauerkraut. There are thousands of ways to make sauerkraut. Sauerkraut and versions of sauerkraut exist in pretty much every ancestral, what do you call it, tradition. Mm-hmm. You don't need to buy anything. You don't need to get fancy containers, fancy bubbling kits or sets or anything. You certainly can if you want to, or you can get those things down the line when you've been making the kraut a while, you've earned your stripes, you want to spend more money on it, but you literally don't need to. It's just that making sauerkraut has blossomed as a pastime, shall we say. And so people are seeing that they could make money off of it, which there's nothing wrong with that because some of those products are remarkable and I want to buy them myself. But you do not need them. You absolutely do not. You need an empty jar from something you already ate. You need a napkin or a towel out of the drawer, a rubber band that you took off of a package of mail or a stick of broccoli, and your ingredients. I mean, that's really all you need.
Yeah, I agree. It's really super simple.
Yeah, and if you just, it'd be, something I think would be really fascinating. This is the coffee table book I would buy. If somebody would just go around the world and take pictures in all these grandmas and grandpas' houses of people making sauerkraut, and just all the different ways, even just the number of homes I've been into myself that I've seen things being made. I've seen one house I went to, they had a big apothecary jar with whole cabbages submerged in salt water, and then he had bamboo skewers just fastened across the top to hold it down.
Wow. Nice.
Yeah. I've seen stone weights. I've used plates. I've used jars of food that I canned. I mean, anything you can imagine. One of my favorite things to do is take when I make my sauerkraut, I shred my cabbage and then I take the butt of the cabbage. I always tell, when I teach classes on kraut, I tell my students, save the outer leaves and save the butt, because then I lay the leaves across the top of the cabbage and I shove the butt down on top, and then I put something across the top to hold everything down under the brine. So so that is the most important key in kraut, is keeping it under the brine. So the way you make sauerkraut, so simple. I'm just going to boil it down to the basics, and there's a billion spin-offs. Every country, every home, every mother, every grandmother has their own version of this, but this is the basics of it. You'll take a cabbage, you'll chop it or shred it, you'll salt it, you'll hammer it with a rolling pin or, whatever. And then you'll shove it into a jar. And if the cabbage is nice and juicy, you'll have enough water to cover the top. If not, you'll just mix salt water to make brine and pour that enough to cover it. You'll layer something on top of it to keep all the pieces, the substrate, all the pieces of cabbage underneath the brine. And then you'll let it bubble and bubble and bubble until it's, a couple days, however long you want, to get it to start getting really fermenty. And then I like to then put a cap on it and transfer it to the refrigerator for a year or more to get a really nice sour ferment going. You do not have to wait that long, but a lot of people I've heard say that the true flavor in kraut does not begin to emerge until after a year. And I'd have to say I totally agree with that.
Yeah, we've done kind of various things over the years that we've left them longer. And we've also had emergency situations where we had to make some suddenly and eat it within 4 days. And it is a very different flavour.
Same.
And
it's still good, though.
It's a matter of taste. Generally, we leave ours about 6 weeks. We don't have a load of storage space here. So we make it in big batches.
Right.
There's I detailed my process in a blog post very early on creating my site. I think it's called Super Simple Sauerkraut, where I've got all the measurements of the salt that I use and the brine that I use. I like to put caraway seeds in because I love the taste of caraway seeds. But I throw loads of different things in.
That's so European of you.
It's lovely. I throw lots of other things in, and it's a good excuse to throw garlic in if you're not fermenting garlic separately. I'm an absolute believer in the power of fermented garlic, so it's a great way to put garlic in.
Yes. I can't make kraut without garlic.
Yeah, exactly. We leave ours for 6 weeks usually. The one thing that I would say that has helped us in the process is after we've shredded and stirred the salt in, rather than pound it straight away, very often we put a lid on the bowl and put it in the fridge overnight. And then we come back to it the next morning and the salt has done its work for us. So already there's lots of liquid. And then when you pound it, it's really easy to get much more of the liquid out. And so
I love that.
Do that. And then if I need extra brine, I'll make up a brine to go on it. We'd use the little glass pickle weights, which I bought like 10 or 12 of 5 or 6 years ago. And so I'll do the same as you. I put the little cabbage leaf over the top to keep everything under the water. And then I'll put 2 or 3 pickle pebbles on and shut the jar immediately and then put it. And I usually cover it with a tea towel because I think light affects lactofermentation negatively. So I cover it in a tea towel. So make sure that it's fermenting as well as it can do. The like you said, the most important thing is keeping that cabbage under the brine. The amount of people who said to me, I can't do sauerkraut because it just goes mouldy, And the absolute essential thing is that if the cabbage is over the top of the brine, it needs to have an anaerobic environment. And if it's over the top of the brine, then it's going to potentially go mouldy. And so keep an eye on it. If you've jarred it, if you've lidded it, maybe do something called burping it, where you just open it up over the sink. Be careful because we've had sauerkraut juice go all up the walls when we've not done it over the sink because the fermentation is so fizzy. So do that every couple of days to make sure the pressure's not building up, and also check the amount of liquid that's in there. And if you see that it starts to decrease in the first week of fermentation, then just put a little bit more brine in there, because that's the crucial part where there's the fight between the lactic acid bacteria and other bacteria. After that, it doesn't matter so much because the lactic bacteria has got a hold, and you don't necessarily need to have it under the brine for the entire period.
Right.
But at the beginning, it's very important. And seriously, out of all the people who've asked me about sauerkraut and all the classes I've done on sauerkraut, that is the key, the amount of brine and keeping the veggies under it.
Absolutely. And if you, the salt, the salt is what's standing between, it takes about 2 or 3 days for that lactic acid to build up to the point that it's stable enough to keep the bacteria and the mold from taking over. So that salt is just there to stand between you and the bacteria. You can also add an inoculation, pour some brine from a batch you already made before just to speed up. Yeah, or some whey. Yep. You can definitely do that. And there's so much information online. It can be too much information online. You really only need to learn from, just find one blog, one recipe, and just work on that. The Healthy Home Economist, her blog is where I first learned how to make sauerkraut. Okay. You can also look, traditionalcookingschool.com has it, Nourished Kitchen has it, my blog, farmandhearth.com has it. What's your blog or your website again, Alison?
Ancestralkitchen.com. Simply ancestralkitchen.com.
Right.
And there's a resources page on it, and under there you'll find the sauerkraut, along with all my other recipes and starters for sourdoughs and everything else.
Yeah, and if you go to my blog, the Farm and Hearth one, also just search the word sauerkraut, and then there's a downloadable packet, the one that I use for my classes, that you can use. So the cost of making sauerkraut at home, if you're using the pretty premium cabbage, making 1.5 quarts is $2 to $3. So definitely way less than, let's see, a quart could run $14 to $18 if you bought it at the store. So $2 to $3 at home for 1.5 quarts. Not too bad. Books on sauerkraut, of course. Wild Fermentation. The Art of Fermentation has a lot about, I think that book is helpful because it's not recipes, as I've said before, but it does get you seeing the gazillions of different
it's a
ways
wonderful read.
It's just drool. It's just drool all over. Asian Pickles by Karen Solomon. I absolutely love Karen Solomon. I love her as a person, and I love her as a cookbook author. But Asian Pickles, sweet, sour, salty, cured and fermented preserves. There's lots of different pickle recipes in there. The Nourishing Traditions, of course, has some fermentation. And another book, Keeping Food Fresh, Old World Techniques and Recipes. It has lots of really just old school ways of preserving food, which would include sauerkraut and fermentation. So, look all those books up and get the one that's cheapest. It'll get you going. I love sauerkraut because, like you said, you throw caraway seeds in it. You could throw garlic in it. I throw dill in it. I throw really whatever I have, whatever is fresh, whatever's happening, I throw it in there. And I agree with you. We have everything up to, I don't even know how many gallons our biggest crock holds, maybe 50, I don't know, but we have 1 gallon crocks up to big crocks, and I've done it in quart jars and pint jars and half-gallon jars and jam jars and jelly jars and pickle jars, just really whatever I've got sitting around. So all right, so not only have we recorded our longest podcast to date, I wanted to throw one more bonus thing out there to people, and that is to remember, if you're talking cheap ancestral foods that can be pricey to buy at the store, especially if they're prepared, but just absolutely bottom of the barrel cheap at home, do not forget beans and soup. Beans can be easily soaked, fermented, prepared at home. So easy, and easily cooked at home. And then soup is just been the staple of humanity forever. And a big pot of soup and a loaf of bread. I have fed, spur of the moment, huge groups of people for pennies with big pots of soup and bread, and you know, throw some hard-boiled eggs in the bowls of soup, and people just like pass out. They can't believe how fancy and amazing the food is. Some books for that include 12 Months of Monastery Soups. This is a book I've used since I was a kid. I don't know why I'm so obsessed with this book. It's by a French monk, I think. But I always feel like if I have no money, I can eat out of this book for free for like months. I don't know why. All his recipes are very, very, very simple. They're, you know, basically vegetables and broth, but they're just so delicious. And then also another good book, just for reference, is Long Way on a Little by Shannon Hayes. And a book that I just encountered a few days ago and was sent to me for review is called Easy Beans by Jackie Freeman. It is not itself an ancestral book, but if you know how to prepare beans ancestrally, you have no problem, you know, just doing that one step in advance of every recipe. But I love the book just because she talks about lots of things that I would never have thought of using beans for. Like you can soak, ferment, cook, and then bake them and make them into snacks and things like that. And she makes, you know, lentils into morning smoothies, and I don't know, just all kinds of interesting stuff. So
I remember putting lentils in fermented lentils in a bread a few years ago. I had a bread with fermented lentils.
Yum.
But I wanted to just add a very quick thing to that, which is I've been researching the Polish soup Zurek recently, and just the amount of tradition in Europe of having simple soups with the vegetables that are in season, a broth.
Yeah.
And very much so here in Italy. You know, the soups, the traditional soups here are broth, scraps of meat or scraps of fat, and then beans in as well as kale and dark green vegetables, because it extends the soup further and gives you the different nutritional profile, whilst also giving you a really hearty meal that you can literally kind of lap up with some bread.
I tell you,
important.
Nothing more comforting than a good soup and a big, crusty chunk of bread.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, I think we've covered quite a bit and hopefully left everybody reeling with ideas. And I will put all these book titles together, and we can figure out how we want to. We can put those in the show notes and the websites that I mentioned. I'll just put all that in one document. We can post that up there. And is there anything else you wanted to throw out there before we wrap this one up?
Only just that the detail of making these things becomes habit, and it becomes easy. The other important aspect, which we might want to deal with in another podcast, is making the time and prioritizing them, because people are convinced now that it's really doesn't cost much to make these foods at home, and you're paying a lot in the store. But then it's the process of committing and having the time, and I think maybe that's something that we could talk about and share what we do and how these have gradually become part of our lives in a future episode.
Yeah. We can do that right after the episode where Alison says how she gave away her iPhone.
Yeah, it's an important part. Do you know how much more bread I made after I got rid of my iPhone, and how much saner I felt?
You don't have to tell me. This is awesome, Alison. Thank you for jumping on with me and chatting this up. I learned so much from you every time that we talk.
Yeah,
so really appreciate it.
Same. Thank you, Andrea.
All right. Until next time.
Yeah. Ciao.
Thank you so much for listening. We'd love to continue the conversation. Come find us on Instagram. Andrea's at Farm and Hearth and Alison's at Ancestral_kitchen. Until next time, we both wish you much fun, exploration, and satisfaction in and out of the kitchen.